Hi, this is Ed, and welcome back. It's May 1st, and first day of spring in May gray San Diego, right here by the ocean. And, the ocean hasn't warmed up enough down the street here, right across from Seaport Village is where I'm in, the condo. And um, it, the sun may show up here on the coast at around 3 o'clock, but inland it's bright and sunny and 20 degrees warmer. So very interesting time of year in San Diego. So, so Christian, you are located in inland California. So is it
Not that
sunny out
far, but
there?
no, it's great too. I'm about an hour and a half north and then also a little bit east, that's correct, of you, in North Orange County. I always tell people I'm so close to Disneyland, I can hear the fireworks from my backyard, which is true. But yeah, it's still gray, but it should get nicer.
Yeah, usually 12 o'clock or so that burns off. But so anyway, Ken, you're in San Fernando Valley, right?
Exactly.
Oh yeah,
And a little gloomy. I'm in an area called Encino, kind of northwest of LA.
yeah.
This will burn off ultimately, and should be a nice enough day as we get through it. But right now, it's kind of what you're experiencing in San Diego. It's ready to get sunny, but not quite yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So now that we have the weather reports,
Yeah.
yeah.
For all eternity.
So the theme of today's program is very, very timely. It's how might, and I was instructed by Ken Oler about how to phrase the question. Ken won't be with us today on this topic. How might stakeholders better prepare employees who they are sending, employers who are sending talent out on assignment, a project, whether it's short-term, long-term business trip, doesn't matter. Many times, talent is not prepared about what it will take to survive and grow and participate in a measurable ROI for the employer. Never mind how to use the skills, the new skills that the employee, the talent develops as a result of the assignment. And people are busy, of course, and it's been an afterthought for most. As it turns out, it's been an afterthought of most line managers. Uh, but the leadership, the corporate leadership who has personal experience on international assignment and domestic assignments, they know that is a problem waiting to explode
Yeah.
if they don't take care of things. So it makes total sense that, okay, the time has finally come. There's crises out there in the industry as a result of COVID and stress in the population with the upcoming elections and wars overseas. I mean, it's like 50s all over again uh, of conflict in the world and actually frightening. So, Christian, um, tell us your take on this idea of the question, how might stakeholders, who are the stakeholders? Okay, the line manager, the corporate
Yeah.
employer, the mobility manager, who is like you
Yeah.
in a prior day, and then there's DSPs and other RMCs who are doing various things. These
Yeah.
are all stakeholders that touch on the employee and family who are being moved.
Okay, I have a whole bunch of ideas and different ways to do this, but I would start out with what you just said, people are busy. If that is the reason why you cannot prepare somebody you're sending on an assignment or even for a permanent move adequately, just know that when they get busier, because they should be working, hitting the ground running ideally in the new location, the chickens will come home to roost. It will be there will be a lot of problems that will distract them that wouldn't have happened had they taken the time, invested the time to prepare adequately beforehand. So one of the main things that should be done is that the line manager sits down with these people before anyone else gets involved and starts talking to them about their expectations of their life in the new country. Once that's done, then the line manager can think about, okay, let's run this by the RMC. Let's run this by the destination services provider. Let's find out what needs to be done first, and let's find out how realistic that is. I give you an example. I had a high level, she was supposed to run human resources for Europe for a big company, sent her to Munich. She had relocated before. Everybody thought, walk in the park. She knows what she's doing. Gonna be so easy. And pretty soon I started realizing her expectations are totally off. She thinks she can go into Munich and just grab an apartment or rent a house, and the schools are just going to be open for her son to come in and join the school. It's Munich. I'm half German. Doesn't work that way. There's a long list of people. The landlords have interview processes. You have to apply to rent a home in Munich, just like you would for a job. She had no idea. So end result, lack of preparation. We came in and prepared her at a time when she already had these fixed expectations, and everybody was frustrated. All the stakeholders you just mentioned. The line manager was frustrated. The client contact was frustrated. My team and I were totally frustrated because we couldn't really help her. We were running up against a wall. She was frustrated. Her family was frustrated. And then the DSP who tried to help and alleviate the problem in Munich was completely frustrated because no matter what they did, it was never good enough. Had somebody sat her down and said, look, we know you're high level. We know you're under a lot of stress. Here's the reality. You're going to Munich. You have to apply for a job. You have to apply to schools. Guess what? Her son didn't get into the 2 schools that she wanted. Why? Because there's a whole line of people out the door waiting to get in. She came in with this, she came from the United States. She was originally from another country, came in with this idea, customer service. Walk in, you buy what you want. Doesn't work that way in Germany. I could have told her that early on. I'm from there.
Okay.
So that was my example. And
thank
that
you
taught me
very
so many
much.
things.
That is really paints a scary picture, but that's reality 101.
Absolutely.
So please, Christian, self-identify yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Tell the audience about your background.
All right. So I was born in Germany, grew up in Switzerland. My mother is Swiss, my dad's German, and moved to California 24 years ago. And I've been in the mobility area for way over 20 years, helping people in Zurich before I even knew mobility as an industry existed, and then in the mobility industry with RMCs for the last 20 years. As Ed hinted at, I'm currently looking for a new opportunity in the mobility sphere. I'd love to work with clients and tell them what works and what doesn't, just like I did just now, and implement their programs.
Thank you. Dr. Ken Lloyd from Southern California, author of books and as a counselor and trainer about jerks at work. Ken, please self-identify yourself much better than I did.
Yeah, hi, Ken Lloyd. I grew up in the Bay Area. Came down to LA for grad school at UCLA and stayed here. Just felt it was a good match with my interests in organizational development, org behavior, and business writing. And I've been working in the field all these years. Some international work, and certainly working with companies that have relocated employees. And I just 110% agree with what Christian just articulated. The planning side of it is so important because it sounds great and glamorous and exciting. You're going to move, you're going to be doing this, but without adequate and real in-depth planning of the type that Christian was talking about, we can be setting up successful employees to fail and to not do well physically as well as economically. This can really take a toll on them when it's not done correctly. So it starts out quite optimistically, but you have to deal with it realistically when talking about relocating people.
Okay, thank you. We're being joined now by Patrick Landers, who's with EY. He's a partner in People Advisory Services, and we'll have him in self-intro as soon as he gets prepared. So, Ken, thank you very much for that preview. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, and good to join the team here. So I'm, as Ed said, I am a partner with EY in our People Advisory Services practice. I've spent close to 30 years in kind of cross-border mobility, working around tax, immigration, payroll, a number of issues affecting cross-border individuals. And I recently returned in August of last year from an expat assignment myself. I lived with my family in Bangalore for 3 years, and then I commuted back and forth between Texas and Bangalore for another 3 years after that, once COVID hit. So I kind of lived the hybrid work experience that a lot of our folks have gone through as well. So
thank you very much for your time. I know you're really busy. EY just published a survey report from your corporate clients about the reality. It's a reality check, I guess, on the employee mobility industry, the services connected with it and how they're being applied or how they should be. But the analysis that I saw in the headlines, I haven't gotten into the weeds yet, but just the headlines, shows that so many companies are not taking advantage of what the mobility service, the mobility function can do for companies. Patrick, please take it from there.
yeah, so I think so. One great reference there. We've recently published we call it Mobility Reimagined, but it's a survey that we do each year. There's over 1,000 participants that are part of this from the mobility industry, from a variety of different, from the mobility function from a variety of different industries. We actually have a conference next week that people are welcome to join as well. It's a free conference, but some virtual sessions that will do a deeper dive in some of those sections. But coming back to the point you raised specifically, I mean, I think one of the things we saw coming out of the survey is that mobility functions are becoming more and more important as we see kind of over time. We actually saw this year for the first time the number of business travelers, the number of expats going out for companies is actually now for the first time we're actually seeing in the results getting back to pre-COVID levels. And so we know that the level of travel has increased, the number of movements has increased. And we also see kind of on a corresponding basis that a lot of countries from a regulatory standpoint are increasing their scrutiny of some of these travelers. And so it comes back to, from a corporate function perspective, mobility clearly has a role to play in this. I will say, when we look at where companies house that mobility function, some view it as some house it under tax or finance, where they view it more as a compliance type function. The ones that we see that house it under HR tend to focus more on the people issues and the processes and engagement that they have with the individuals there. And, I think that part of when you kind of dig into some of the details of the survey is it really has to be a team effort. So whether you're housed under finance or whether you're looking at the regulatory aspects, you have to look at the people aspects. And if you're looking at the people aspects, you have to be closely working with your legal and tax teams as well to be working through the regulatory challenges there. You can't do either in isolation. And I think that was, one of the kind of key things that we saw. I think another factor that we saw that was kind of an interesting statistic that came out of it is we actually say, we asked the question of, would you be more likely to stay with your organization if you got an expat assignment, if you got a chance to work international? And overwhelming majority of individuals responded that they actually would be more likely to stay with their company. So from a retention perspective, you know, it was 2/3 to kind of, we did another LinkedIn poll on the same topic and had 30,000 people or so respond. When it was like 85% of the respondents said they would be more likely to stay with their organization if they got an expat assignment, or if they got a chance to move international with their organization.
So Patrick, let me ask you, if I may, and if I say it wrong, please correct me or redirect. It's quite all right. What about the family, helping the family understand in advance what the psychological issues and challenges will be?
Yeah. So you know, I will say, and I can personalize this, right? I mean, first of all, my wife is a saint for supporting me through a career in global mobility, where I do a lot of travel, some with the family and some without. But when it came to, you know, we had 4 kids, and at the time 4 kids under the age of 16, and we were looking at moving to India. I'd never actually traveled to India, and so really it's almost sight unseen. We're looking at moving to a location that is very unfamiliar to ourselves. And so when we looked at going over, you know, I think that, you know, EY was good to allow kind of a trip for me to go over. So I went over and took a look at it. And actually, my wife had initially said, I don't really see the need to go over. I trust your judgment. You go over and do it. And the firm really kind of insisted, and I was supportive as well of, no, let's make sure that we take an opportunity for this kind of pre-assignment trip with my spouse, and let her take a look at what is it going to look like to live and function there. What is the school going to look like for the kids? What is that experience going to be? And I will say, you know, we as we were traveling back, I think even from that trip, she was telling me how important that was. And she didn't even realize how important it was going into it, but how important it was for her to have seen that, to be able to get her mind in the right place, to be able to say, okay, this is what we're doing. And I think, you know, sometimes it's as simple as, you know, there may be a policy in place that allows for something, but I think it's critical that organizations look at, how do you kind of strongly encourage a certain behavior up front that you know is going to yield different results. And, you know, I will say on the children's side, you know, kind of dependence, there was probably less focus on that, and we saw some impact with our kids. And so I think there's definitely more we could do as a firm, but we see some organizations where they really engage with the entire family up front to try to help them understand the transition they may go through, whether it's through kind of, you know, counseling or destination services or a pre-assignment trip, or even once they're on the ground, offering some resources up, kind of partnering up. A lot of times, if you have a location with a large population of expats, you can do some kind of population where it's almost, you know, teaming people up to say, okay, you'll get together with other families that are similar, and they'll help you assimilate in your location.
Well, this is really interesting. So I don't remember. Have you already met Dr. Ken Lloyd?
We may have crossed paths on a previous call, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's very nice to meet you here. So
Nice to meet or re-meet you. But what you're saying is just so interesting. I really enjoy hearing all the prep that goes with it, so people understand far beyond just, yeah, we're going to relocate someone. Everything else, and there's so much behind it to make it work, as both of you and Kristen are both saying. So informative and helpful.
So when you relocated, did you have help from the company?
I did, absolutely. I mean, we had destination services when we landed on the ground. We had, like I said, they encouraged us to go on this kind of look-see trip. But I will say, you know, I mean, we professional services historically operates pretty lean in that environment. I will say, you know, when we moved into our apartment in Bangalore, it just happens that our location was very close to the corporate offices for one of the large oil companies. And a lot of our neighbors, there were probably 15 families that were all part of the same organization that were there. And when we would talk to them and compare notes, you know, their organization did did more than what our firm had done, because they had more of a critical mass. And so they actually had kind of where they would team people up. So a new person coming in, especially, whatever the non-working spouse, a lot of times there was a spouse that would come in that was working for the company, and then you'd have a stay-at-home spouse. They would team up the stay-at-home spouses to kind of get together as part of, they would do coffee with them when they first came over, but they would also team up with them. And in Bangalore, a lot of it was just to network on the practical aspects of living over there. Where do you buy groceries? Where do you get fresh fruit? Because it wasn't as simple as you go to the neighborhood market and everything you're looking for is there. I mean, there was a fruit vendor that would come around to the complex. There was a meat delivery company. If you wanted fresh meat, you had to work through that. There were 4 or 5 different things you had to piece together just to be able to sustain kind of weekly meals for the family. And I think that, that network that they had created, and thankfully, because we were in the same complex, we were able to kind of leverage that, even though there wasn't anything formal that was arranged for that. The kind of informal connection with other expats was definitely something that we found useful.
What about healthcare? And so were you in a compound or in
we were just an apartment complex. Now it was like a gated complex, and so there was we had kind of a neighborhood. There was a green space in the area that we had. There were actually we had apartment houses. We were in the apartment towers, but then they had villas as well. So, I mean, compound's probably a little strong. When I think compound, I think, Saudi Arabia, where like Saudi Aramco has these kind of massive neighborhoods and other facilities there. Ours was basically I call it kind of a small gated community. But I will say, coming back to your question on healthcare, healthcare was a big concern going over. And I think, the reality is there's some great options for medicine in India. There's some well-trained physicians there. There's some hospitals and facilities that are pretty good there as well. But I think the challenge even there is that you have such a volume especially in Bangalore, where you've got, it's I would probably get the statistics wrong if I quoted them, but it was something around 15 million people, I think, in very compressed space compared to some of the other cities that I've been in. So, part of it is just knowing, well, so which facility do you go to? Which one is the best facility for what you need? What do you do in an emergency situation? And, how do you navigate? Thankfully, we didn't need major healthcare while we were kind of on the ground there, but we did have, at one point, my son, and this was all kind of pre-COVID, but had the flu prior to a big trip that we were planning to take. So we were going out of country for 10 days or so, and the day or so before. And so we were like, well, where do you go? And so we thankfully, part of the kind of destination services that we had from when we landed, our company paid for someone to take us around. We pre-registered at the hospital, and so we already had the mechanics. All we had to do is make an appointment and go in. Whereas if you didn't do some of the pre-registration and things, it can be quite an ordeal to be able to get services in a way that we would be accustomed to.
So you are at the partner level, quite senior, but not everybody who's sent on assignment is at that level. So I'm trying to get my words right here. So what about expectations by the employer, whoever that person would be, of you as the assignee reporting back on a regular basis, keeping a journal, communicating about what you're learning and how you might apply things from your learnings going forward? Is there a record? And tied in with that, and I welcome Ken and Christian to jump in on this, the coaching element of the assignees, sort of helicoptering, if you will, of somebody from home office watching what you're doing and coaching you along the way in order to achieve maximum performance while on assignment.
Yeah.
I mean, is that wishful thinking or?
No, I will say, and again, would love to hear kind of Ken and Christian's perspective on it as well. I'll give just kind of my quick summary of what I heard from you. I mean, so one, I think there are different types of assignments, and so there are some assignments that are more for the strategic development of the individual, where you see you're giving someone an opportunity to go work overseas to maybe it's to develop a certain skill set, maybe it's to build a communication, kind of stronger communication with a particular office or particular business unit. Those are maybe treated a little differently. In my case, in my case is a fairly common use case for kind of expats. I was going over to fill a specific role, a specific need that the organization had, where they didn't have someone locally that they felt like could fill that particular role. And so it was a big part of my role was actually leadership development on the ground. And so I was over there to basically build my replacement while I was there, so that we could, have stronger leadership of a large team that we had of about 3,000 plus individuals that we had in country there. And so in that perspective, I was fully seconded to the team there. I was working locally with the team there. But I reported into an individual that basically was part of our global leadership team. And so even though my role, I'm a US partner, I came from the US firm, I went over to India, I was not working exclusively on behalf of the US firm at that point. I was really more in a global role, in my metrics and my performance and everything that I needed to report about any help, any assistance I needed, any support I needed to help accomplish the goals that I had. All of that really kind of went up to global. Now, I did still have a connection back to the US team, and I would still, had regular touch points. I would connect about once a month with the person who was my US supervisor before I went over. But my day-to-day tasks were really so different that it was really just connecting from a broad perspective of here's some of the things I've learned. I would do a periodic, you mentioned a journal, I actually would do a kind of a recap of what I'd done at the end of each year. I always made time to create a kind of a story of here's what I've done over the course of this year. And I always made sure to share that pretty broadly with the team I worked with back in the US. And so in a role where you're trying to meet a specific need, I would say there wasn't maybe as much of a critical need to report back on a regular basis. Here's what I'm learning each month. Whereas if you were over in more of a strategic development role, especially at a more junior level of an individual going overseas, there might be periodic milestones that you would want to check to make sure that they're actually getting the experience that you need them to get, and they're not just tucked into a corner doing, an individual contributor role, but they're actually learning the skills that you need them to learn.
Thank you so much. Let's have a three-way conversation here. So, Christian, this has really been an excellent contribution from Patrick. I thank you. So I'm stuck on this idea of coaching the assignee to maximize their performance and the value back to the company, of course. But oftentimes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, oftentimes when people go out on assignment, they're not guaranteed a position of importance or maybe even any position when they might return. Yes. Or when the target date is coming. And that's pretty scary, isn't it? And how do you imagine, from a stakeholder point of view, how do you imagine the employee's going to feel? And are they going to start looking for a job right away? And you're going to lose that talent, even though you're spending $1 million or more on this person. Christian.
So, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, and take it clearer from your perspective, not mine.
Yeah, so I have had that happen to transferees that either I helped with when I was a consultant, or then my team that were hired away while they were on assignment. That happens quite a bit. I would say the only thing I can think of right away to prevent that from happening tying this to what we were talking about earlier, would be very close communication. And I think that, yes, of course, everybody's busy, and I appreciate that. Patrick, I'm sure, had a lot of weight on his shoulders to perform this role. But as for the mobility manager, to check in to see, hey, how's your family doing? How did that go with your son that had the flu? Looking at it from this more, as you pointed it out earlier, human HR-like perspective, I think would go a long ways in making sure that the transferee would felt, I'm being taken care of. I'm not just there to work. I'm being taken care of. My employer genuinely cares about my family, which means they also care about my mental health, my well-being. And that, I think, will go a long ways in making sure that you stay on that assignment, you come back, and because you feel well about what your company's done for you, your chances are better that you can then position yourself as, this was a great experience. I would like to continue to help you. And then hopefully your employer will see it the same way. But I have had people also that were let go mid-assignment, and all you're getting is a household goods shipment back. Figure out where you're going to live. Figure out where you're going to get around. You sold your house and the mortgage rates are up. Tough luck. And that's bad for the employer long term.
I'm speechless. Ken?
Yeah. In this era, one of the new management trends that we're seeing is, it falls under the heading of continuous feedback. It doesn't mean every minute, every day. It does mean perhaps every 2 weeks, a convo between manager and the employee, whether it's virtual, on site, it doesn't really matter, but just to touch base, doing a lot of what Christian's saying, whether we're talking about how are things going on these performance goals or in these on your developmental goals, or what else is happening. And certainly for individuals working overseas, where there can be conversations on how are you doing, how's the family, as you said, how's your child doing, how are things going. So we're not helicoptering, not monitoring, but there is, just as Ed's saying, a coaching aspect to it. How can I help you? What can I do from over here to help you meet the kind of goal? So it's touching base, it's supporting, it's helping, it's providing guidance and coaching just as the process continues. But that is every couple of weeks. Some employers like to have employees actually set up these meetings just for a little bit more involvement, a little more engagement in the process. But I think that helps, particularly, in today's world where people are frankly more used to working with employees offsite. Is it a huge difference for me to be talking to an employee who's in Dallas or in Bangalore? The important thing is we're maintaining that contact, and the employee knows I'm interested, I'm concerned. As an employer, we want to know how things are going, and we are thinking about you and your future. And so it's not just to give you a great experience in this overseas assignment, but rather we're investing in you, hopefully, so that as things continue down the road, you'll continue to advance over there or here. From the employer standpoint, as you said, it's a risk when employees are doing great overseas and they get stolen away. Ideally, if we're building someone and their international experience, we're getting a stronger individual out of it, and we can use that person continuously overseas, excuse me, as well as here. And by use, I'm saying capitalize on and let the employee continue to grow and experience the satisfaction that comes from advancement and responsibility and recognition in the position.
What about stress management?
That's a great question. We know that life changes are stressful. All change is stressful, whether it's a promotion or a termination. In some cases, there are literally scores life change indices that look at how great of an impact a given life change will have. And the research shows that if there are a lot of life changes, certainly significant ones, the likelihood of illness becomes greater.
Yeah.
So I think what's to be done is, number one, on the prevention standpoint, it's just what Patrick and Christian are saying, It's all of this preparation, so you know exactly what you're getting into. We're taking steps to help with you, with your family, with your children's schooling, with medical care, trying to reduce as many of the unknowns as we can, because change itself has a huge impact, but the unknown aspects of it just magnify all of it. And in these regular conversations, the word mental health was used as earlier in the discussion. We want to watch that. How is the employee sounding? There was this animated person who suddenly sounds like this. Yeah, I'm doing all right. What's going on there? We have to be very astute in our observational skills to making sure that we're watching for that, because life change generates stress, stress generates illness. So we want to make sure our employees are taking the right steps to take care of themselves, and we're supporting them and helping them in doing that. And a lot of the basic stress management techniques are important, particularly when these individuals get to that new environment. Here you are, you're there, you're with your spouse, you're with your children, tremendous life changes for them. And it's just to be aware of that and to support them as they fully engage and adjust to the changes of these new environments.
Thank you. I want to move on to the next idea that I have in my head, Patrick, regarding your kids and meeting kids who dress different, look different, different religious backgrounds. Of course it's a challenge, but what about is there prep? Are there videos given so people get to see reality? I mean, even if it was just an Indian TV show, a Bollywood movie or something.
It's an interesting question. I will say we didn't do a whole lot of prep. I mean, just in complete candor. The school the kids went to was actually it was an international school. But it was, when I say it was an international school, there was maybe 10 to 15% Americans, and the rest were from a variety of different cultures, maybe 25% local Indian nationals, or maybe they were expat children of Indians that had returned to India, but they were Indian nationals, and then it was a variety of other countries across Europe and Asia that they were part of. And I will say, the school did a good job of trying to help kind of celebrate different cultures, I mean, there were local holidays and things that people would celebrate, but there were also, holidays back to your home country that a lot of times a family might want to celebrate. And so, we had a lot of Australian nationals that were in our apartment complex. So I felt like we probably had our biggest celebrations on Australian holidays, not Indian or American holidays, just because they knew how to throw a good party. And so we did that. But the school, going back to the school, made a point of trying to help articulate to the kids, okay, well, this is a different way of, this is, how this particular group celebrates, or here's the history behind this celebration, or this style of dress, or this something. And so the school did give some exposure to that, and they actually had a celebration once a year where they would have an international festival where everybody got to make food from their kind of local culture, and they might have a dance or a song or something they would share. And so it was a big, all the parents would come in. It was big, kind of an entire day that was spent kind of in celebration of the different cultures. But I will say, when it really came down to, our individual kids, we would have the conversations we would have with them. A lot of times it was on holidays. It was on times where they're kind of away from everything. That was when they would share, well, gosh, I really felt singled out in this conversation that we were having in class about this topic, because, back in Houston, when we were kind of, there, it was groupthink a lot of times, I think, in a classroom. So you might have a concept that is, someone brings up that maybe in a global perspective is controversial, but in a context of a pretty homogenous group of folks in a suburb in Katy, Texas, is everybody kind of thinks the same way. And so I think it really challenged the kids to think about, okay, how do you, one, how do you coexist with folks of different belief systems and different backgrounds and different cultures? But then also, two, how do you not only coexist, but how do you interact with people where you're not putting somebody on the spot or making them feel uncomfortable with the conversation? And so I think that was something that, our kids even today reflect back on that and say, it really taught them a lot about, not honing in on somebody to make them feel uncomfortable, but really just how to ask questions in a way to engage with them and understand, as opposed to just immediately jump into a conclusion.
Hey, everybody, this is Heather in London. Thank you for joining us. Heather was a featured speaker at our recent London Global Business Meeting on April 23 at HSBC. She's a specialist. Well, she's a coach, cafe coach, and a specialist in this regard with a dual career situation. So we're talking with Patrick Landers, partner, People Advisory Services in Ernst & Young. His recent return from an assignment with family in India has been the basis of this conversation. Dr. Ken Lloyd in the in the spectacles up there.
I've met Ken before.
And here's Christian, who's a mobility expert. So
yeah, Christian actually had a question. I'd love to hear Christian's question to Patrick, I guess, so that maybe I can jump in on that part of the conversation to hear Christian's question.
Oh, thank
Christian.
you. It wasn't even a question, but I wanted to share that that kid was me. The cultural differences between a town in Germany and the Swiss countryside are humongous. Language being one of them. The people there speak Swiss German dialect, which when I was 9 years old, I could understand from my mother, but I couldn't speak. I was very much singled out as the outsider, and I was given no tools whatsoever on how to adapt, how to figure out what's happening here. So I always tell people, it is not coincidence that I ended up in mobility. This is, very, very personal to me, what you just shared. And therefore, trying to prevent that from happening again to somebody else's kids is something that is very near and dear to my heart.
Heather?
Yeah, well, wow. I mean, it seems like Patrick, I know that India is it's in the top 5 of the most challenging assignment destinations in the world. I can only imagine, the story that went before. So, I'd love to have heard. I wish I'd heard it. I had another meeting, so I couldn't come on. Christian, look, I'm a linguist. I speak fluent German, French, and Spanish. And in my first life, I was a translator. And I thought I spoke very good German. I studied Germanistic in university and at Heidelberg. And my first job was in Bavaria. And I arrived in Bavaria, in Munich, and I couldn't understand a word because of they have their own Bavarian language and dialect. So it's very humbling. I felt extremely humble and felt like I was looking into something that I truly didn't understand, but I thought I knew everything because I'd just graduated. So it was a big reality shock. So, and I think what I noticed with my global mobility journey is that anybody who's linguistic or multicultural, it's very difficult to get a job where you use all of your languages in a useful way unless you're in global mobility. So global mobility really seems to attract, like a magnet, polyglots and multicultural, wonderful masterminds. So I think that's another reason why I love this. I'm actually a business psychologist, but I love global mobility mainly due to my own personal emotional roller coaster of global mobility, but also the difference that I make in the lives that I touch by helping dual career families navigate some of those challenges that I'm sure Patrick illuminated. So it's great to be part of this conversation. And when you experience it yourself, it never leaves you. It shapes your identity, both personally and your work identity too. So if you can do something about it and channel it in a good way in your work, then I feel you're giving back in some way and you're making that experience really count. So yeah.
So Patrick, was your wife employed?
So she was not. So she actually used to do what I do. So she was in the mobility profession, but it had kind of retired from that when our youngest was born. And so she was at the house and kind of working at home, I guess I would say, taking care of the kids and kind of arranging things. So she was not working when we went over. But I will say, you know, when we got there and kind of looking at just the magnitude of how you try to navigate the I mean, the kids took a bus back and forth to school, but you know, even just trying to get the groceries and the things that you would need to provide meals for the family and others, it, you know, if you were accustomed back home to going out and eating at restaurants and other things, that option was not as convenient there, because there were, you know, there weren't many places. There was only one place within walking distance of where we lived, and everything else required you to take a car. Most of the expats didn't drive, and so you would have a driver that was assigned to you. And so it's a lot of times by the kids would get home and others, it just wasn't feasible to take the kids out to eat. So her day job became going to the grocery store 3-4 days a week to buy different things, different pieces of the meal that you could only buy this thing at one shop and this thing at another shop. And so even if she, you know, when we look at kind of the folks that were dual career, a lot of them had full-time nannies and others just to navigate in that environment.
Interesting. Heather, what did you, oh, I'm sorry, Ken.
Yeah, just a quick observation, kind of sidebar to the conversation, but I think it is absolutely fascinating and fantastic that the three of you are so passionate about your careers, that so many people today are dissatisfied with their work, the match between their personality, interests, and aptitudes, and what they have to get up every day and go and do, as opposed to doing work that is so enjoyable, satisfying, and enriching for you, that you would have done it regardless, probably for less than whatever it is that you're being paid, because of the satisfaction that's inherent to what you're doing. I know Heather, as a business psychologist, the match between the individual and the job is so important. And I see
it is.
In global mobility, it is so natural for each of you through what you've experienced in life. I think that it's just very fortunate. I think it greatly empowers you and your effectiveness in your work. Again, sidebar comment, just an observation, but I really enjoy hearing from people who are so totally immersed and satisfied in their work, because it leads to a satisfying life and personal life as well. So very, very interesting. And I look at your backgrounds and see that match.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Yes, Christian.
So totally on the money. I think global mobility is highly addictive. And some people just never get off of it. And I would count myself among those people. And also the second part of what you said, my background is in linguistics. I studied linguistics, and my master's thesis was about politeness in business environments. And that has a lot to do with what I did until recently, and what I hope to be doing again in the near future.
I'm sure you will.
You're totally right.
Yeah, Heather, when you talked at the London meeting last week, you were the star, frankly. Everybody was glued to you and Yvonne Kwa from World Bank talk about the dual career issues and the psychology and the stresses and what to do about it all. So could you just summarize for our global audience watching this, in the days, weeks, and months that will follow this program, about you and about the Permits Foundation, and also please address what you learned from Mr. Mr. Ricardo about the
Yeah,
4 pillars
the 4
of
pillars.
HSBC.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, I was astounded. I mean, let's just jump straight in. I was astounded by his insight into, look, we all have our beliefs around someone's going to be opening this wonderful conference that Ed had facilitated with Andrew. A lot of us were meeting each other for the first time. And I was astounded that someone working as a client relationship manager at HSBC, and who is, he's highly talented at what he does, the insight that he had into the international assignment perspective from a theoretical standpoint, and then from an experience standpoint, because I think it's all about our experiences and how unique they are, but there are patterns in there that we can all relate to. I really believed it was going to come purely from a financial well-being standpoint, because it was a banking conference session. And it didn't. It was really quite moving and quite touching to hear someone of his caliber talking about something that is so emotional. And I really believe it's because he experienced it himself. Because I'm a psychologist, so I analyze a lot of things after the events have happened. And he moved from Mexico City. I think it was just before the pandemic, right, Ed? It was either just before the pandemic or just after the pandemic. And so he experienced, and he speaks very good English, I mean, excellent English. And he spoke exactly about what happened when he arrived, and how the knowledge that he thought he had about being quite fluent in English and being able to navigate being in a career and managing a team, and were completely short-lived and not realistic at all to the actual reality of him trying to navigate culture shock, and the impact of culture shock on him being able to perform and being able to adjust in quite a senior role. And it was actually quite touching. He gave an example for one of the pillars of a spouse called Brenda. And he gave a kind of case study approach. And when you, at face value, you just took Brenda as an American moving over to, let's say, the UK. But when you actually read her story, you realized that she had third culture kids. She had studied in a different country and lived in 2 countries prior to arriving in the final destination. So in total, there were 5 different cultures that had touched her before she'd landed in the country of where she was. So I think, and I think this is what it's all about. It's about the experiences that we have as users. We are, and this is how I now refer to I work in dual careers, and I am a dual career. But what I see in my purview is that a lot of metrics measuring the effectiveness and efficiencies of global mobility programs are very, very, there are many shortcomings. And I don't believe they tap into those stories. They do not tap into those unique stories. Like, Patrick, I didn't hear your story, but I'm intrigued. I am sure that there isn't one statistical metric that we could use that would be able to really showcase the experience that all of you had as a family. And so how can we measure those valuable insights, share those insights, and ensure that the voices of this demographic that is so important? Because if you want the assignee to be up and running and performing day to day, when they're too going through culture shock themselves, and they're going through reality shock, they're going through the adjustment phases and everything else, but their family is struggling, whether it's the children, whether it's the spouse or the significant other, it's very, very short-lived, because the psychological contract expectations of any global mobility function, and in fact a business function, is that you hit the ground running and you start performing on day one. You're managing a team, you're managing all sorts of different dynamics, and you've got this, it's not happening in a vacuum. So you've got your family that you're also very concerned about. And the Permits Foundation has been in existence for 20 years. It's actually based in the Netherlands. It's an NGO, and they have, I think they've got 45 sponsors, but for 20 years, they've been lobbying all around the world to gain direct work access for the spouse, and actually not just work access, but also for them to find something meaningful and purposeful on assignment so they don't get left behind. So I call this group the hiding in plain sight group. That's how I describe them. And I recently did some research, which took a year, and looked at the hidden insights in the depths, if you will, of those experiences around the globe. And so it's called Peace of Mind on the Move. And I'm now really promoting the insights of that research. And a lot of it is about hidden expectations that are beyond budgets, beyond point systems, beyond the level of the assignee and what budgets are allowed to them. It's about the human factors. It's about the psychological contract of what people expect and how they want to be looked after, or at least considered, when they are taking up something so important that they're going to move their cultures and move their family into an area that they have absolutely, in some cases, no support. And when I say support, I'm not talking about financial support to buy curtains or financial support to join a gym. I'm talking about support for mental health and support to navigate the emotional roller coaster of culture shock at all different points of pre-departure, arrival, post-departure, and then experiencing culture shock and being able to then finally adjust. So it's quite an emotive topic for me. And because I've now looked at metrics, big data, I've looked at the thick data, and I see that there's this wash, rinse, repeat of the same thing being churned over and over again. And I really believe that's why there isn't significant change in this area for this demographic to be taken seriously. So I'm kind of on a mission, if you will, and I'm really excited about it because I believe that now with DEI and B, and inclusion and diversity and ESG and human-focused, people-focused, policies, that finally maybe having a family-centered approach might be the game changer. It might be the game changer for global mobility.
Well, brilliant. Christian.
So to answer to this, now I fully agree with everything you said, Heather, but let me play devil's advocate for a moment and say, yeah, those sob stories, this is horrible. The transferees, they should be tough enough to just go and hit the ground running, and this should just work. We demand that. Stop being devil's advocate. Right. So the dollars and cents, the bottom line of all of this is, if your transferee has a mental breakdown, the spouse has a mental breakdown, the kids have a mental breakdown, the transferee leaves, somebody else comes and says, hey, you work for me, I sent you home, and I help you buy a house. What's the dollars and cents on this? What is that going to cost the company? And I'm not just talking money, I'm also talking reputation, I'm talking lost business opportunities. And I think that the way to approach this has to be two-pronged. It has to be Heather's approach to deal with the people that, let's say, get it. And then it has to be the devil's advocate approach I just sketched, which is, you don't get it, but this is what it's going to cost you. So let me persuade you to get it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and I'd really be curious. I mean, this it's a very interesting topic, and Heather, I think that it's to your point, it's definitely an underserved topic. I think one of the things, and part of my background is as a kind of tax professional, I've looked at regulations, tax, and I look at some immigration as well. When you look at tax law and immigration law and the things that you're allowed to do in countries, especially as a spouse of somebody that's there on an assignment, it really does start to you look at the question of, what is it going to take to make a shift in that kind of policy setting? Because even in spouses is obviously the first domino to fall, but even with children, one of the things growing up, my first job was kind of a rite of passage, and I did lots of different jobs growing up. I worked at a grocery store, cleaning up the aisles and cleaning, all of the different things. But part of what shaped who I am today was built in those first jobs of kind of just learning tasks and other things. By the time I got to university, I had 4 or 5 years of my working career before I'd ever got to university. And I look at my kids not being in an environment where they could work during those same formative years.
Yeah.
They had some amazing experiences that I didn't get to have. They had some cross-cultural learning and things that they got to experience. But I do think, when you look at just the kind of broader development of the family unit, I think that, providing some of those opportunities, whether it's the spouse being able to continue on a career path and what that looks like, and then, even the children as well, kind of what is that, what are we doing more broadly around the family unit to provide opportunities when somebody goes? And, I will say for a spouse, there's definitely some kind of dual career options where it's sometimes difficult if that organization, that company doesn't have significant operations in the place where the primary assignment takes place. But with the ability for people to work remotely and others and oversee things, a lot of that really after COVID has gone away. You really have the ability to work almost anywhere as long as you can travel periodically and do things. And so I think that's where, then it becomes incumbent upon the immigration legislation, the tax legislation to try to see how do we help this catch up. And on the tax side, it's always about the bottom line. As long as you can capture somebody and make them pay taxes, most of the regulatory discussions on the tax side are fairly straightforward. On the immigration side, it's often a more complex, because then it's a question of, are you taking local jobs? What does that look like for allowing somebody to be able to work in that jurisdiction? So, but very interesting topic, and it's been great kind of listening to what you have to say on it. I would love to know more about the permits organization and some of the things that you guys are doing there. So.
Okay, please connect using the chat, and that'll be a great ROI. Well, we can continue. We're just at about 60 minutes now. So Heather, what are you working on?
At the moment, I'm really working on the impact of peace of mind on the move, because it took a year of my life. Basically, I took a step back. I haven't done research since I did my thesis when I was in Japan and I couldn't work. So basically I did a master's degree, and part of my research was expatriate focus of dual career couples. So that was 20 years ago. So doing this research was wonderful, but going back, it was very, very wonderful to go back to an academic approach, if you will. And now what I'm seeing is that the practical reality of the impact is, how can I connect the dots? And maybe you guys can help me here. I'd be grateful if you would. We're presenting, so I was commissioned by REA. So I'm a consultant, by the way. I have my own consultancy, but I do a lot of work for REA. I've been affiliated with them for many years, and they provide, or they were the pioneers of spousal support in America, but they operate worldwide. And so what we're seeing is the global footprint of what we've been working on. We've sharing this, and we're in the process of, it's a thought leadership piece. It's already won some awards. It's been shortlisted for other global mobility awards. So fingers crossed, because I'm actually competing against Ernst & Young, I think EY and NetExpat, and there are a few other really big players. And there's just me, a one-man solopreneur, if you will, that's done this research study. I'm suddenly there thinking, okay, well, this is brilliant, but how do I make this relevant? I need to make this relevant for HR policy. I need to make this relevant for value propositioning. And I need to make this value for business. Exactly as Christian said, we are entering the age of generative AI. We are entering an age of digitization. We've been there for a while already. We are looking at cost containment across the board. So how do I generate insights that are workable, that are feasible, that fit in with the IR5, because we're in IR4, but let's face it, IR5 is just around the corner because things are moving so fast, or Industry 5.0 as we call it here in Europe. So, and how can we use health and well-being and really unite some of these conflicting themes? Because we're seeing with the millennials in the workforce and the zillennials, what we're seeing is what they want are barriers to market. They want health and well-being. They want life-work balance, and they're not prepared with presenteeism and the quiet quitting and everything that we're seeing. They actually want that. So what I'm in the process of doing now is working on breakthrough models. I'm working on breakthrough models to actually make the work that I've done relevant and applicable for global mobility. So that's what I'm working on now, more thought leadership pieces, more white papers, and speaking to wonderful people like yourselves and finding out, okay, well, where are those challenges, and help me make these breakthrough models. You know, how can I cross that bridge and really deliver something that's going to be workable and not just metrics that are meaningful.
Christian.
I mean, the first thing, and you may have thought of that already, but the first thing that comes to mind I would do is I would reach out to somebody who works in compensation, the people that do cost projections, and I would get some data from them. For instance, let's take Bangalore as an example. Family of 4 going to Bangalore for 2-3 years costs, whatever it may be. And then you take REA's offerings, you compare the two. It will be striking how cheap REA is in comparison to what everything else costs.
Yeah.
And this is kind of extrapolating from the point I made earlier. You show them, a table. This is the overall cost. This is what you're risking. And I don't think that will be without an impact to the financial people that you're trying to convince.
Good suggestion. Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much.
Wow,
Heather, I like your additional focus on millennials and Gen Z, because obviously that's where the world is going, and we can't be looking back at some of the old themes in the workplace at all. And they are different. They are looking at their future, at their growth, at their development, at their advancement, and certainly new and varied experiences that will enrich their lives. And I'm not talking monetarily, but will enrich them as individuals, which is exactly the kind of context and framework that you're taking. I would be very forward focused in it, recognizing the tremendous shift in the overall workplace and in the frankly the world of work. It's so different as the millennials move forward, and Gen Z as well, and they are far more mobile. And to me, they'd be very ripe to get involved in global mobility and in international work. They'd be comfortable. They'd be excited. They're looking for those kinds of growth and development and enhancement opportunities. So it ties in directly with what you're doing. Really, I think your forward focus on this is excellent. And forward focus is a way to look at Gen Z and millennials as well.
Yeah.
Doing to keep that forward focus in mind.
So, one of the things that kind of comes to mind, just listening to the conversation, if I go back to, when I started my career, likely probably similar to when a lot of you started your career, we used to, at that point, being adept in technology and being able to use Microsoft products or Lotus Notes or Lotus 123 or whatever it was at that point. Those were things that were like resume skills. Those were things you highlight.
Yes.
And today, nobody highlights that as a skill. It's just an expected element of your job. And I think that's something where, I look at global mobility as a discipline, and I look at the skills. There's always going to be need for people to kind of manage that group. But when I look at a lot of the things we're talking about on this call, whether it's language, whether it's cultural learnings, whether it's how to navigate and integrate into a different environment, those are things that are today they're skills that are not common across a lot of our population. Mm-hmm. But if you look at that younger generation, it is definitely something where I think it's going to become more expected. And I think the last point I would say on this, Christian, I saw you kind of raising your hand. When I think about the cost of trying to help people navigate that, right? That is something where I think that the spend will move in that direction. I actually think expat assignments will get cheaper, because I think some of the things that where we used to have to pay people hardship premiums to go live in a location, a lot of those hardship premiums have either gone away completely or definitely have reduced, because as there's a stronger expectation for people to go live outside their home country. Maybe there's a cost of living, but even cost of living sometimes reduces over time. I think that you will see overall assignments get cheaper, but where companies should be willing to, where I think they'll likely be willing to invest, is in things like this kind of coaching and wellness aspect of the assignment of how do we ensure that it's successful for what we're doing. Kristen, jump in. Yeah.
It's kind of uncanny what's happening on my end, because as we're talking, I'm getting these WhatsApp messages from my 19-year-old daughter who's in Paris right now studying with her community college class. It's the end of her semester, and she's talking about the €5 little Eiffel Towers that she got as a gift for her friends. So it's insane that we're talking about Gen Z being more mobile and being more out there trying to travel. And yes, this is happening literally as we speak. So I think we're on the right track here. And I think that I really hope that more people in the corporate world, to make it very simple, wake up to this, and to wake up to people like my older daughter, my younger daughter as well. She wants to study fashion in Paris, and she probably will. This is the new reality, and it needs to be supported by the workplace.
Mm.
Thank you for being on the program again. I welcome you to come back. May 29 is our live in-person meeting in New York, inside EY's Global Center in Hoboken, just across from Wall Street. And the EY survey information will be topic A. And for the audience is building now. The leaders are corporate managers. I'm at liberty to say some of the company names, but not others. Excuse me. Oregon is a pharmaceutical focusing in on women's health care. H&M is a retailer, we all know. MasterCard and others are not public yet. So it's going to be just a wonderful experience. I'm not sure at this point whether it will be allowable to do public Zoom, virtual, not sure yet. And so if you should all come. But anyway, that's the cost, right? The cost is exorbitant to go from California into New York area and stay there. I mean, it's not as expensive as London was for me, but it's there, and never mind time away. So I really love doing in-person meetings again. The relationship with HSBC has been renewed. They have invited me to come back in late September to do it again. That'll be number 4 in the series, and of course I'm quite honored for that. And this is on May 29 in New York with EY. This is the second time in the recent series post-COVID. So I'm really honored to have that. And Patrick, thank you for your guidance introduction. So someday we'll do Texas.
Someday we will keep that on the radar. Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
It was great to meet you all. Thank you.
As well.
Yes.
Thanks for your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank
Yes.
you, Ed.
All of you, wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, you'll all receive this program link later in the day today, probably in the evening after I review it. Okay, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ed.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody. Bye.
Thank you.